$275 million. That's how much it's going to cost to revive Hockenheim to be F1 ready again. But what about the old tracks, abandoned and forgotten through time? Tracks where politics and money caused F1 to ditch them, only to never host F1 races again. Well, there are another 8 tracks we're going to explore in this video, and like last time, we're going to rank them from best to worst. My name's Jake, welcome onto the first track. Okay, so to begin, we're going to take a look at Germany's iconic circuit. Not you. The Hockenheim Ring originally started out as a test track for Mercedes-Benz in 1932, and the iconic circuit was marked by its dramatic evolution through the decades. I mean, just have a look at how many changes were made, it's pretty much unrecognizable. By the 1970s, Hockenheim became the new home for the German Grand Prix, replacing the Nürburgring because of the safety concerns in the sport. And as F1 entered the late 1990s, the dominance of Michael Schumacher brought the German Grand Prix into a new era, where the Hockenheim Ring became the epicenter of F1 fandom in Germany. The old Hockenheim Ring was a unique blend of extreme speed and technical challenge. The circuit was infamous for its long straights, which required teams to optimize their cars for straight line speed, while maintaining stability through the tight chicanes and the twisty stadium section. The forest section was particularly iconic, as you all know. The drivers would hurtle through this narrow, isolated part of the track at well over 200 miles an hour, with the dense trees creating almost a tunnel effect. It was a dangerous part of the track, mistakes were unforgiving, and the absence of modern safety only made it worse. Over the years, Hockenheim became the stage for some of the most memorable moments in F1 history. In 1982, Nelson Piquet's race ended in a confrontation that was as violent as it was memorable.
Yeah, take that! Oh my goodness!
But the drama didn't end there. 2000 brought one of the most unexpected victories in F1. Rubens Barrichello stormed through the field in changing weather conditions to win from 18th on the grid. Look, I said it in my last video, I'll say it again, this guy was rapid. Now, these moments really demonstrate the unpredictable nature of racing at Hockenheim. I mean, literally anything could happen at this race. But the story of Hockenheim's old layout came to an end in 2002, when the circuit was reconfigured to meet modern safety standards and commercial demands. The long straights were cut, the forest section was removed, and what remained was a track that, while still challenging, no longer had that raw, untamed character that had defined it for decades. While the new circuit brought improved safety and better facilities for fans, the original track's legacy as a high-speed, high-risk battleground left a lasting impression on the sport. But even since the new track layout, the circuit has still maintained its ability to produce some pretty crazy moments. I mean, just have a look.
There's rain, look at that.
Yeah. Sebastian Vettel, he has been leading, but now is out of this race. It's all confusion down at the Mercedes garage.
Stay up.
Oh, there's a spin! There's a spin, it's Sergio Perez!
Yeah, he's gone onto that, there we go, it's the skating ring.
Verstappen just been off the track.
He's had the spin there. Oh, look at that.
It's coming now round. Oh, Charles Leclerc's gone out, gone wide and gone out.
Wow, he's just gone a little bit wide and touched the wetter part of the track. It's not often you see Lewis making mistakes like that.
As Valtteri Bottas pushing hard to catch Lance Stroll, has spun off into the barriers.
We really need this track back. Okay, so where would we rank the old Hockenheim track? Well, look, I'm going to have to give it S tier. I mean, this track was as iconic as it was dangerous. I love it. I mean, the new circuit was one of my favorite tracks to race on F1 2020 as well. I do thousands of laps in time trial, and that first corner is so satisfying if you get it right. And, you know, it was in the old layout as well. So just an incredible track, and I really hope that we see Hockenheim back on the F1 calendar soon, because we need a race in Germany. You know, it just makes sense. Okay, so moving on then, Montjuic Park was more than just a street circuit. It was a test of nerve, precision, and survival. As F1 expanded globally in the 1960s and 70s, Montjuic represented the allure and peril of racing on street tracks. The Spanish Grand Prix alternated between Montjuic and Jarama, hosting events in 1969, 71, 73, and 1975. And that 75 season was a particularly treacherous year for F1. We'll get onto that in a moment. But the circuit itself was as beautiful as it was dangerous. Drivers navigated narrow, twisty streets with tight corners and sudden elevation changes, all while contending with the lack of modern safety barriers. There were no tech pros for you to crash into here, but at least you had to give you a Barcelona. Seems like a fair trade. The bumpy surface also made handling difficult, and the proximity of the barriers meant that even the slightest mistake could result in a big crash. Spectators would stand literally meters from the tarmac. It reminded me of those old videos of the Group B rally stages, where you would see the cars parting the crowd like the Red Sea. I mean, if you wanted to touch a car on this track, you just had to reach your hand out. Now, despite, or maybe because of its dangers, Montjuic produced some of the most thrilling races in F1 history. Jackie Stewart's 1971 victory showcased his mastery of the circuit, while Emerson Fittipaldi's 1973 win demonstrated the skill and precision required to conquer this demanding track. It was basically another Monaco, but you could actually overtake at this track. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the turning point came during the last race hosted at this track. It was the last race for a reason. It was the 1975 Spanish Grand Prix. The race weekend began already under a cloud of controversy, with drivers concerned about the lack of proper barriers. But their fears were tragically realised when Rolf Stolbermann's car suffered a wing failure, causing a horrific crash that claimed the lives of 5 spectators. The tragedy marked the end of Montjuic's brief but storied place in F1 history. The track was immediately abandoned, and look, it had to go, right? It was a necessary step toward having better safety standards, just having standards at all, really. In terms of ranking, I'm going to give it A tier. It has everything you need to make a great racetrack. High speed, heavy braking zones, elevation changes. It looks like it would be a really cool track to race on in the sim as well. I'll have to see where I can get my hands on that. But yeah, I think you'll notice that this is a bit of a theme in the video with some of the tracks that we'll discuss later on. They were quite deadly, yeah. Now, the next track I've actually been to. Brooklands wasn't just any track, it was the cradle of British motorsport. It was opened in 1907 as the world's first purpose-built motor racing circuit. Brooklands was where speed records were shattered and where the legends of early motorsport were born. Before the official formation of F1 in 1950, Brooklands was the proving ground for many of the sport's greatest drivers. Its steeply banked corners allowed cars to maintain high speeds throughout the lap, a revolutionary design for the time that pushed the limits of what was possible. But the track surface was rough and bumpy, making it really challenging even for the most skilled drivers. And don't forget, these drivers were basically just sat on a 16-cylinder monster with no seatbelt, a cigarette in their mouth, and tyres that looked like they were made for a push bike. Not exactly a great recipe for seeing the checker flag. Brooklands was the stage for many of motor racing's greatest achievements in the 1900s. In 1937, Raymond Mays, driving an ERA, won the British Grand Prix, showing off the strength of British car engineering in a field full of European manufacturers. Much like F1 today, these races were so much more than just competition. They were showcases of the technological advancements and daring spirit that defined the era. But then World War II brought an abrupt end to racing at Brooklands. The circuit was used in the war effort, with parts of the track being used to build planes and others to train soldiers. After the war, the track was really unfit for the new generation of faster, more powerful racing cars. New tracks like Silverstone, which offered better facilities and safety, also contributed to Brooklands' decline. And by 1949, the circuit was closed for good, leaving behind a rich legacy that would influence motorsport forever. When Brooklands closed, it marked the end of an era, but it also paved the way for modern racing. And although it never hosted an official F1 race, its legacy is a huge part of motorsport history. It's a reminder of where it all began. This track was F1's origin story. So really, where else could I rank this track but S tier? We have this track to thank for the early strides in British motorsport, which became international motorsport. Okay, so the next track is sort of abandoned. I actually can't believe that it was even being discussed that it was going to be built. Fuji Speedway was Japan's first major international racing circuit, nestled in the shadow of Mount Fuji. And it was originally meant to be, wait for it, a high-speed oval for NASCAR. Yeah, I bet you didn't see that coming. The track became the heart of Japan's motorsport dreams. By the mid-1970s, Japan was making waves in the global car industry, and Fuji Speedway was a symbol of that rise. The 76 F1 season was one of the most dramatic ever, with the rivalry between James Hunt and Niki Lauda grabbing the world's attention. The championship was decided at Fuji under some pretty wild circumstances, but looking at the track, as I said earlier, the speedway was originally built for Japan's version of NASCAR, so the track was originally designed to be a 4-kilometer super speedway. But as with most projects, they ran out of money, and so only one of the bankings was ever built. But it's still there today. I mean, you can take a look on Google Maps, you can see it there it is. The track's location at the foot of Mount Fuji also gave it an incredible backdrop, but it also meant that the weather could be all over the place, often leading to wet and dangerous races. Now, Fuji's NASCAR layout was abandoned before it was even built, but the track that F1 actually raced on was also dropped because of accidents in the 76 and 77 races. F1 returned to Fuji in 2007. The track had been redesigned by Hermann Tilke, but the preference for Suzuka as the Grand Prix venue led to Fuji being dropped again after 2008. The track's remote location and unpredictable weather made it tough to keep on the calendar, but even though it no longer hosts F1 races, it's still got a lot of activity there. WEC has the 6 Hours of Fuji, which is always a good race. In terms of rankings, the fact that it gave us proper wet weather races would have made them epic to watch. We need those back in F1 desperately. This track is really cool, so I'm going to give it A tier. I know it's not really a properly abandoned track, but part of it is, which is the NASCAR Oval, and ChatGPT said it was abandoned, so it must be true, right? Okay, so let's travel back to 1957, where the world of Formula 1 took on the mighty Pescara circuit. Now, this wasn't your typical race circuit. It was a monstrous 25.8 kilometers of public roads that wound along Italy's Adriatic coast. It was the longest circuit ever to host a World Championship race, and it wasn't just long, it was very, very dangerous. Now, just for context, Spa is the longest race in F1 currently and is just over 7 kilometers. Now, you'd have to do about 3.5 laps to cover 1 lap of Pescara. That year, F1 was all about the fierce battle between Maserati and Ferrari. But it was Stirling Moss driving for Vanwall who would take on the likes of Fangio and Beira in what would become one of the most grueling races in F1 history. If to give you guys more context on the championship battle, Fangio and Moss won every single championship race of the season except one, the Indy 500. So this was very similar to that titanic battle we had in 2021, albeit without that unexpected twist at the end.
It's a late lunch by Verstappen.
But looking at the track, it combined 2 ridiculously long straights as well, where engines were pushed to their absolute limit. And don't forget, this was in the 50s as well, so this race would have been just as much an engineering feat as it would have been a grueling race for the drivers. But then just when drivers might think they could breathe, the circuit would tighten into narrow, twisting sections that snake through villages and along the coastline. I mean, one wrong move and you could be driving through someone's house. The elevation changes added even more difficulty, with the track climbing and descending through hills, offering little room for error. In Pescara, drivers weren't just racing each other, they were battling the circuit itself. In terms of highlights, the 1957 Grand Prix was the only F1 race ever held at this daunting circuit. Stirling Moss, known for his fearless approach behind the wheel, took the victory in a Vanwall. And his win wasn't just about speed. It was about surviving the relentless challenges that Pescara threw at the drivers. 18 grueling laps of this hot, dangerous circuit in those death traps called racing cars at the time. I mean, they don't make them like they used to. But from the very beginning, Pescara's dangers were clear. The circuit's extreme length, coupled with its narrow roads and lack of modern safety features, made it increasingly unsuitable for F1, even at a time when they didn't really do much to start with, so that's really saying a lot about the safety of this track. Also, the logistical nightmare of hosting a race on public roads didn't help, so after that legendary 1957 race, Pescara was dropped from the F1 calendar. In terms of ranking, I'm going to give it a B tier alongside Vietnam. Just very on the fence about this track. Okay, so moving on, we're in the deep, picturesque hills of Normandy, and we're taking a look at a beloved part of French motorsport history. Now, I'm going to try and do this with a French accent, so bear with me. The track was rouen-les-essarts. Rouen-les-essarts, if you're from South London like me. We'll just call it Rouen, just, to save any embarrassment. In the 50s and 60s, as Formula 1 was rapidly growing, circuits like Rouen, with their fast and flowing layouts, became central to the sport. The 1962 season marked a turning point for F1, introducing new technical innovations and fierce competition among teams. But by 1968, the inherent dangers of motorsport were becoming increasingly clear. Drivers were pushing their cars to the limits on tracks that hadn't changed much over the decades, and Rouen was another track on that list. Now, this is a track that demanded every ounce of a driver's respect. It was known for its high-speed straights, fast-sweeping corners, and massive elevation changes. The narrow roads and lack of runoff areas meant that even the smallest mistake could be catastrophic, which obviously raised the stakes of racing there in the 50s. Rouen's history is filled with some of F1's most thrilling races. In 1962, Dan Gurney claimed victory in his Porsche 804, marking the German manufacturer's only win as a constructor in F1. Now, I think it's important that we just take a moment and appreciate how good looking this car was. I mean, it's like if you got someone to make a futuristic version of a classic 50s F1 car. It looks so cool. Porsche, please come back. We need you. We want you. Buy Alpine. Go halves with Nico Rosberg. I don't care, right? Just please make it happen. But as cool as this car looks, and it looks damn cool, it was Gurney's smooth and controlled driving that helped him get through Rouen's challenging layout, making his win a significant moment in that season's championship battle. Another unforgettable race was the 1957 French Grand Prix, where Juan Manuel Fangio displayed his unmatched skill, dominating the race and further solidifying his legacy as one of F1's greatest drivers. I mean, bro had a 50-second lead to P2 in that race. Just insane. I mean, who does this guy think he is? Max Verstappen? I mean, come on. Now, Rouen's role in F1 came to a tragic end during the 1968 season. During the French Grand Prix, Joe Schlesser's car crashed, bursting into flames. He didn't survive. It was actually really sad. John Surtees refused to drive the new Honda chassis at Rouen on the grounds that it was too dangerous. And then the driver that was the home hero for France didn't survive the weekend. I mean, that story just completely sums up what F1 was like in that era. This death highlighted the circuit's dangers. A combination of high speeds, narrow roads, and no safety standards led to Rouen being dropped from the F1 calendar. Rouen was quite similar to Montjuic. It was a circuit that embodied the dual nature of F1 tracks at that time. I mean, they were thrilling and so beautiful, yet incredibly dangerous and completely unforgiving. In terms of ranking, I'm going to give this a C tier. It doesn't look particularly special to me. I don't really rate this track. It's not a loss to F1 like Hockenheim was. Okay, so let's lighten the mood a little bit. We're going to the land of the free, the country that loves driving in circles. I still don't get that, by the way. It's the US of A.
Greatest country in the world!
Riverside International Raceway was a legendary American circuit that had a key role in F1's early attempts to expand into the US. I'm not gonna lie to you guys, it didn't work. The early 1960s were a time of growth for Formula One, and they decided that Riverside in California was the best place to host the 1960 US Grand Prix. The race brought F1 to the West Coast for the first time. Now, the track was already famous for hosting major American racing events like NASCAR and sports car races, which really made it a natural choice for F1 to go to with its pedigree. And Riverside was a true driver's circuit. It was known for its diverse and challenging layout. The elevation changes added another layer of difficulty, but it was the location that was the biggest challenge. You know, being in the desert and all that. Riverside's involvement in F1 was short-lived, with the 1960 race being the one and only World Championship event held there. Despite being a decent layout, Riverside faced competition from other tracks in the US like Watkins Glen, and the logistical challenges of hosting F1 in the desert became too much. It wasn't a great race event either. I mean, like, nobody showed up because the magazines and the event organizer had a falling out, so there was basically no publicity, and the track itself ended up being turned into a shopping mall. So there's that. But in terms of ranking, I'm going to give this a B tier. It had a rich history outside of F1, hosting Can-Am races and other major series, but in F1, it flopped. You can add this to your list of times F1 tried and failed to break the US. Okay, now the final track is one of my favourite Tilkedromes. Trust me, Hermann Tilke cooked with this track. Istanbul Park opened in 2005 and was Turkey's bold entry into the world of Formula One. The mid-2000s were a time of rapid globalization for F1, with the sport expanding into new markets across Asia and the Middle East. Istanbul Park was a key part of this wave, bringing F1 to a country with a growing passion for motorsport. The track quickly gained a reputation as one of the best modern circuits. Just have a little listen to Mark Webber in the 2006 Williams.
Bridge, and just listen to the engine, just watch the driver's commitment. Here we go. How much would you like to do that? 165 miles an hour through the final part of turn 8. And that is what
Istanbul Park was a circuit that combined the best elements of classic and modern track design. It featured a mix of high-speed corners, long straights, and technical sections and chicanes that required a perfect balance between speed and handling. The track's layout was especially praised for its elevation changes, which added to the challenge and excitement. Drivers who could master turn 8 often found themselves with a significant advantage, at least until that became flat out. The track delivered some of the most memorable moments in recent F1 history. I mean, the 2010 Turkish Grand Prix featured a dramatic collision between Red Bull teammates Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber while they were battling for the lead. I mean, in my last video I discussed Red Bull's multi-21 team orders, and this crash had a huge impact on Mark Webber's trust in the team, even though multi-21 was 3 years later. We also had the 2020 shenanigans where they were driving in the dry, but the track had less grip than when it was wet. That was a bit weird. Now, despite its popularity among drivers and fans, Istanbul Park struggled with financial issues, leading to its removal from the F1 calendar after 2011. The Turkish Grand Prix was briefly revived in 2020 and 2021 due to COVID's impact on the F1 schedule, but the long-term future of the race remains uncertain. The track has had difficulties in attracting large enough crowds for the races, and that means that it couldn't really justify paying to be on the calendar. Istanbul Park is a modern classic in F1 history. In terms of ranking, this is A tier for me. I really love this track. It's similar to Sepang, and I love Sepang. It's tricky, it's fast, but it's very unique in its layout, which I really like. We need tracks with character, and well, this track had lots of it. Now, speaking of characters, you ever wonder what happens to drivers that ignore team orders? We know that teams love them, fans hate them, and well, some teams don't know how to do them properly. So if you want to see the worst team orders in F1 history, you can watch this video here. Oh, and if you enjoyed this video and you haven't subscribed yet, you know what to do. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.